Hi everyone. I hope that you all enjoyed your weekend and ready for the new week. This is week 6. We're going to study chapter 14. Don't forget, you also have your term papers due next week on Monday. There won't be any extension. I got, of course, lots of emails from you guys asking about your topics and everything. So. I hope that you have a topic in mind by now. Start working, finishing up your term papers. Read the syllabus on how you can submit your paper. I'm not going to spend time here talking about it. All the information about the project, about your paper is on the syllabus. I also created a folder on D2L, so also check that out. Do not email me, please, your papers, okay? Just use the Dropbox that I created on D2L and submit it there, okay? And make sure everything is working. Your paper should be MLA format. If you're not familiar with MLA, I ask you guys to attend the workshop, which was on Wednesday last week. The Writing Center was hosting it. Hopefully you took the advantage of that workshop. If you missed it, that's still fine. If you look at the library, there are tons of MLA papers there. You can just look at them. I also tried in that folder to put like how you should sort your paper. You should have for instance, your name at top of the paper, my name, your section number, your course number, your title. You need to have an introduction, discussion about your topic, and conclusion at the end, and then your citation, your resources for me, at least 5, okay? Pay attention to all the requirements, and I'm pretty sure you can use your papers, okay? All right. This week we're going to study chapter 14. It's about money and banking in United States. We have some definitions. Definitely make sure that you review those definitions, like functions of money, what we mean by money. We will talk about the structure of the Federal Reserve as a central bank in United States. We kind of have a unique structure for our Federal Reserve because, of course, the size of the country. So we have 14 a Federal Reserve in United States. Of course, the head Fed is in Washington, D.C. This is where the office of the Federal Reserve chairman actually is in D.C. Probably some people say probably the second most powerful person in United States is the chairman of the Federal Reserve, okay, after the president of the United States. Many economists and many people actually believe that the second most powerful person in the United States is the chairman of the Federal Reserve, okay? And you can also, I sent you some articles last week, I think 2, on how the Federal Reserve is doing during pandemic. So that's the job of actually the Federal Reserve, to secure employment, to secure stable inflation rate, things like that, okay? And they're doing that right now. The thing that the Federal Reserve is doing right now during pandemic is to keeping the interest rate low, which was actually low already. So there is not much for the Federal Reserve to do during this recession, unfortunately. The Federal Reserve actually promised to keep the interest rate low. So what happened was, if you were following, I'm not sure if you were following the news or not, but before pandemic, the Federal Reserve, I think it was like 2 years ago or 3 years ago, 3 years ago, the Federal Reserve started actually to increase the interest rate, because the interest rate was very, very low after the deep recession we had in 2006, 2007, to kind of boost the economy. Because when the interest rate is low, the Federal Reserve actually is encouraging us consumers to borrow more money, to put some balance on our credit cards, to start spending money, buying a new house, getting a new loan. If you are a business owner, again, the interest rate is low, so it is a good time for you to get a loan. So to boost the economy, the Federal Reserve tries to, during recession times, to cut the interest rate. So the lower interest rate will motivate more investment and consumer spending, that we also discussed in chapter 7. The I and C were 2 important components of GDP, right? So by increasing I and by increasing C, GDP will go up, right? So the economy actually will recover. It didn't really happen much, or it wasn't that effective during the 2006 2007 recession. That's why the government has started spending more money. So we have the stimulus package by President Obama, and that actually helped along with the low interest rate. But again, it took us a while actually to recover from that recession. And it was also one of the discussions that you guys did this semester. um, so what happened was, when the economy was kind of stable after probably 8 years, the Federal Reserve decided, okay, the unemployment rate is pretty low, the economy is doing well, so it is time for us to increase the interest rate. And they started actually increasing the interest rate 4 years ago by 0.25%. And they did it a couple times. And because they wanted us to be ready for the next recession. They didn't know that there would be a pandemic, but the economists actually were predicting that there will be another recession. And the funny part is that they were expecting that the recession will come from China, but not in a shape of a virus. But they were saying that because the economic growth rate in China actually is slowing down, there will be another recession because it will impact other countries' economic growth. Okay, so we wanted to be ready for that recession. But the recession actually hit us faster than what we were expecting, and it was in terms of a virus this time. So the Federal Reserve started to increase the interest rate. But again, before pandemic, at the beginning of or the end of 2019, the Federal Reserve started again cutting back those interest rates. I don't know why, don't ask me. It was the policymakers, I think, in the Federal Reserve. So they started cutting the interest rate again, close to 0%, okay? And when the pandemic happened, the interest rate was already low. So it wasn't really high enough for the Federal Reserve to cut it back to motivate us as buyers to, start spending, borrowing. Okay. So the Federal Reserve, during this pandemic, during this recession, the Federal Reserve's actions actually, in my opinion, are not that effective because the interest rate was already low. And when you read this chapter and also chapter um, 16, when we talk about monetary policy, you will see that the Federal Reserve important way of impacting the economy is through the interest rate. Why? Because they actually they are in charge of the money market. We will talk about also money market in this chapter, at the end of this chapter. Okay, so how they can change this money market by changing the interest rate and the quantity of money in the market. Okay. um, so the Federal Reserve is right now, during this pandemic, is promising us that they are going to keep the interest rate low. So that's a good promise for the investors, especially. Maybe not for us as households, because some of us do not have any job, but it's good for the investors. Okay, and also remember that the job of the Federal Reserve is to make the prices stable and not to allow the inflation rate to go up much. So they also promised that. That's a good thing. So we shouldn't be really worried about the inflation rate, hopefully. But we're going to have a difficult times still in the future, in my opinion. Okay, so this would be a bad recession, as many economists are actually predicting, unless we have a vaccine and then we can recover kind of from this recession. But it will take a while. And besides, government actually, the government again is just like during the previous recession that we had, that President Obama started spending money in the economy. So we had again stimulus package. We had another one during this presidency. So again, the government is also spending money, and it was also one of the topics that you had, one of the discussions that you had. And I actually responded to many of you that, yeah, the government is also spending money. But whenever it comes to government, also think about, because you are studying macroeconomics, also think about the long run impacts of this spending in the economy. We already have a huge government budget deficit, and we also have a huge national debt, two things that you are going to learn in this chapter. So, and also future chapters when we talk about fiscal policy, which is next week. So think about the long run impact of having a bigger deficit and national debt. Remember, deficit is different from national debt. Deficit is coming from the balance between government spending and government revenue. So when we say we have budget deficit, it means that our government is spending more than what it's making. So the deficit will go up. National debt is okay, we don't have enough money to spend as government, so we're going to borrow, just like individuals, right? You don't have enough money, you go borrow from your parents, from a friend, from a family member, from a bank, right? That's exactly what the government is going to do. When the government has deficit, the government will start borrowing from its own central bank or from other countries. In our case, we're borrowing from China a lot, okay? So the national debt is how much deficit the government has, how much the government borrowed, and just like any other loan, we're paying interest, right? So another component comes here, the interest rate we're paying on these loans that we're getting, okay? And they're gonna go up every single day because of the interest rate, right? So that's the national debt, okay? So government is spending, but what will happen to our national debt in the future? That's something that you can think about, okay? Anyhow, you will learn about deficit, national debt. You will learn about Federal Reserve important policy tools. Okay, they're all those policy tools that you're going to study in this chapter will impact the interest rate. That I kind of spent time talking about them and how this interest rate is a key for the economy. Another thing that you are going to learn in this chapter, in chapter 14, let me just look at my notes, I don't want to miss anything else, is the money market. So definitely pay attention to this money market part. So just like chapter 3 that we talked about demand and supply in a perfect competition market, we're going to talk about demand and supply in the money market, okay? So the money demand has a very kind of typical shape of downward slope. It shows the relationship between the interest rate, because remember that the interest rate is the price in this market. Okay, so we have P in chapter 3, now we have interest rate, that's our price. And the quantity demanded of money, how much money people want to hold, okay? The shape is again downward the slope, so pay attention to the shape of the money demand, how we define money demand. The money supply, however, we had an upward slope, if you remember supply in chapter 3. We do not have that upward slope supply in the money market. Why? Because the Federal Reserve actually is the only authority that can control the quantity of money in the market. So no matter what the interest rate is in the market, at a given time, the quantity of money supplied, how much money we have in the money market, is under the control of the Federal Reserve. So you can imagine, interest rate is going up or down, this quantity supplied is fixed. So instead of having an upward slope supply, we have a vertical supply. So the shape of the supply of money is vertical, okay? And again, just like chapter 3, when you put them together, you can have the equilibrium in the money market, okay? The money demand can shift to the right, to the left. Same thing for the supply of money. Supply of money can shift to the right, to the left. And remember, the only authority that can shift this money supply is, again, the Federal Reserve, okay? And anytime that you shift the supply of money, the interest rate will go up. Will change, right? Because again, the interest rate is on your x-axis. It's your price in the market. So if you change the supply, the interest rate will change. That's how the Federal Reserve actually can control the money market, by changing the supply of money. The Federal Reserve cannot really change the demand for money, because demand for money is coming from us, buyers, individuals, business owners. the Federal Reserve cannot really control the supply of, the demand for money is coming from us, but Federal Reserve can control the supply of money. Okay, so anytime that the Federal Reserve wants to change the interest rate, the Federal Reserve can change the supply of money. As soon as the supply of money changes, the interest rate will change. And it's easy to remember because the supply of money and interest rate, they move in the opposite direction. So if the Federal Reserve increases the supply of money, look at the time, looking at the time, if the Federal Reserve increases the supply of money, the interest rate will go down. If the Federal Reserve decreases the supply of money, the interest rate will go up. So that's how the Federal Reserve can change the interest rate in the market, through the supply of money. Okay, and we will see in the future chapter, in the monetary policy chapter, that the Federal Reserve can do that to also change the aggregate demand during recession times or inflation times. Okay, so pay attention to the graph, pay for the demand for money and the supply. Definitely look at the other definitions we have in this chapter. The policy tools of the Federal Reserves are important, and let me know if you have any question. I believe that you have discussion this week. That will be our last discussion 4 on D12. So try not to miss discussion, and also your paper. Have a good week. I'll see you soon.